Hello and welcome. This is Pre-Uni New College. This lesson is intended to provide information about thinking skills and how to solve these questions through strategical steps. These logical explanations and solutions will be beneficial. However, please be advised it does not give all the answers to solving the thinking skills questions. Most importantly, consistent study and reading are essential for successful results. Pre-Uni New College has always taught strategies and tips to students on how to approach questions, and this lesson is intended to guide and benefit you. This lesson and guideline about thinking skills is not intended as a shortcut to understand the thinking skills. Students must study consistently to achieve successful results. So now let's begin the lesson. So welcome everyone to part 2-3, section 1 of problem-solving strategy for thinking skills. In this part, we'll be going through the types of problem-solving questions you may encounter. We will also be learning some tips to solve these problem-solving questions. So there are 3 types of problem-solving questions in thinking skills. They are finding procedures, identifying similarity, and relevant sections. We will be covering through relevant sections this lesson. What are relevant section questions? Relevant section questions are questions in which students are presented with more than necessary information. Unnecessary pieces of information are included to distract students. These questions rely on students' ability to filter through and select only the needed information to answer the question. If we break down each word of the question category, relevant means that something is closely connected or appropriate to what is being considered. Selection is the action or fact of carefully choosing information that is most suitable. Essentially, we need to use logic to accurately select the pieces of information that will be helpful to find a solution to the question. Relevant section questions typically use the following mathematical concepts in which students should have a strong grasp of, such as identifying relevance, making conclusions, number operations, table and graph, and verbal data processing. We will be covering the first 3 in this section. Identifying relevance questions will require students to understand contextual information and be able to identify which pieces of information are necessary to answer the question. These questions will typically involve real-world situations and will challenge the students' mathematical skills and abilities. Consider the following example. Tony spends 20 minutes on one book of WEMT homework, 30 minutes on one book of writing homework, and 10 minutes on one book of STTC homework. If Tony spends 40 minutes on his WEMT homework, how many books did he go through? To solve this question, make sure you understand the information. Then analyze the information and the question. Lastly, figure out which pieces of information are needed to answer the question, then perform the appropriate mathematical skills. The solutions of the questions are as follows. We are only looking at the time it takes for Tony to finish his WEMT work. So the information about the writing homework and the STTC homework is irrelevant and can be ignored. So Tony spends 40 minutes on his WEMT homework. So 40 minutes divided by 20 minutes, which is the amount of time he spends on one book. 40 divided by 20 is 2 books of WEMT homework. So that means Tony went through 2 books of WEMT homework books. Making conclusion questions require students to use their logic to accurately interpret and infer a conclusion by understanding the relevant information to answer the question. Consider the following example. Julia was first in the class this term for the term test. John was second this term in the class for the term test, and Catherine always places third in the class for the term test. If Julia and John always swap places each term, who will be second next term? So to solve this question, make sure you understand the information, then analyze the information and the question. Lastly, figure out which pieces of information are needed to answer the question, then perform appropriate mathematical operations. The solutions of the question are as follows. Catherine's piece of information is irrelevant to the question, so it can be ignored. We know that Julia and John swap places each term, so that means since Julia came first this term, next term she will come second. Number operation questions require students to solve the question using a combination of arithmetic operations. Students will be required to understand the contextual information and determine relevant pieces to solve the question. Consider the following example. We are given a table with the number of orders received and the number of people working each day, from day 1 to day 3. If the number of orders increase each day by 50, how many orders would be placed on day 3? To solve this question, make sure you understand the information. Then analyze the information and the question. Lastly, figure out which pieces of information are needed to answer the question. Then perform appropriate mathematical operations. The solutions of the question are as follows. The number of people working column is irrelevant to the question. The number of orders placed on day 3 is 550 plus 50 is equal to 600 because the number of orders increased by 50 each day. When looking at problem-solving questions, this is a general approach that can be used to solve questions. Let's look at how we can apply these tips to relevant selection questions. The first step is to read the question. If you misunderstand or misinterpret the question, your solution may be incorrect. The second step is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. In problem-solving questions, many pieces of information will be provided and all related. Therefore, a thorough understanding of the question is necessary. The third step is to identify and process which pieces of information are needed to solve the question. In many questions, much more information than needed is available and provided, and identifying which of the following information is not necessary is important. The fourth step is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. Presenting information in different ways can help to recognize patterns and gain further insight. The last step is to solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. Use the necessary mathematical concepts and processes that you know to find the solution. Let's look at this example of an identifying relevant question from the Selective Sample Thinking Skills exam. 5 children did a test with 5 difficult questions to answer. Haley was faster than Gabriella but got 3 questions wrong. Adam got all the questions right but took the longest. Natalie finished second but got 2 questions wrong. Gabriella got more questions right than Natalie but finished after her. Camilla wasn't as fast as Natalie, but Natalie was not as fast as Haley. If all the above statements are true, only one of the sentences below cannot be true. Which one? A. Gabriella got fewer questions right than Adam. B. Haley was faster than Camilla. C. Haley was not first to finish. Or D. Haley got fewest questions right. This question falls in the relevant selection question category, as this question requires students to process given information and determine which answer option cannot be true by identifying the relevancy of each option. Then, let's apply the general approach method to solve this question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking if all the above statements are true, only one of the sentences below cannot be true. Which one? We want to determine which pieces of information is relevant to determine the incorrect answer option. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand that there are 5 children doing a test and are measured based on how fast they finished it and the number of questions they got wrong, and one of the statements in the answer options cannot be true. I need to determine which one. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. From the question, the key pieces of information are all the dot points in the question, as they are all needed to solve the question. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. We may want to simplify the dot points into a diagram and show the relationship between each student. We notice that the order from fastest to slowest is Haley, Natalie, Camilla, or Gabriella, and then Adam. The order from most questions right to least questions right is Adam with 5 points, Gabriella with 5 points, Natalie with 3 points, and Haley with 2 points. We don't have information about Camilla. Step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. Placing the information into a table, we can conclude that option C cannot be true because Haley was first to finish in the test. Let's look at this example of an identifying relevant question from the OC sample thinking skills exam. Zara's class wanted to decide what color to paint their classroom. They decided to have a vote. Students could vote to change it to red, yellow, or green. Everyone had to cast 2 votes, but they could not vote for the same color twice. The color would only be changed if everyone voted for the same color. If this did not happen, the room would be left unpainted. Every color got at least 1 vote. Knowing one of the following would allow us to know the result of the vote. Which one is it? A. No student voted for both green and red. B. Every student voted for either green or yellow or both. C. Red was the most popular vote. Or D. Only 2 people voted for green. This question falls in the identifying relevant question category, as this question requires students to determine the relevant answer option that will help us know the result of the vote. Then, let's apply the general approach method to solve this question. So the first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking, knowing one of the following would allow us to know the result of the vote, which one is it? We want to determine what piece of information is relevant to help find the result of the vote. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand that students could make 2 choices between red, yellow, or green. All students needed to vote for the same color for the wall to change color, and we need to find what piece of evidence will help understand the outcome of this vote. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information are needed. From this question, there are 2 key pieces of information. Key information 1 is that everyone could vote for 2 out of 3 different colors. Key information 2 is all students needed to vote on the same color for the wall to change color. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the information has been presented in a simple form, so putting it in a different form may be time-consuming. Step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. Everyone had to vote for 2 out of the 3 colors. Knowing that no students voted for red and green suggests that the possible combinations students chose are red and yellow or green and yellow. This means everyone voted for yellow. This piece of information tells us the outcome is that the classroom will be painted yellow. And therefore, the correct answer is A. Now let's look at this example of making conclusions, relevant selection question from the selective sample thinking skills exam. Muhammad's school wanted to find out how different sports affected people's fitness levels. They made all the best sports people take a fitness test. This is what they found. 1. The fittest runners were fitter than most swimmers. All the gymnasts were fitter than most of the runners. All the swimmers were fitter than all the gymnasts. Which of these sentences can be concluded from the above information? A. The swimmers' average fitness level was better than those of the other groups. B. The range of fitness levels was the greatest amongst the runners. C. Runners and swimmers would generally be fitter than gymnasts. Or D. There were less of a range of fitness levels among the gymnasts than among the swimmers. This question falls in the relevant selection question category, as this question requires students to find the relevant pieces of information to reach an appropriate conclusion. Now let's apply the general approach method to solve this question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking which one of these sentences can be concluded from the above information, we want to determine which of the answer options is relevant to the information provided in the question. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand that students are tested on their fitness levels and that we need to solve the relevant answer option from the information provided. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information are needed. From this question, the key pieces of information are all the dot-pointed lines. These are all necessary to solve the question. Step 4 is to analyze and represent the data in different ways. In this question, it may be helpful to simplify the dot points into a diagram to understand the information better. From the information, we can order from the most fittest to the least fittest is fittest runners, then fittest swimmers, then just all swimmers, gymnasts, and then most runners at the end. Step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. From the information provided, we can deduce that the relevant answer option is option B. Since the fittest and the least fittest are both runners, it must be the case that the range of fitness levels were greatest among the runners. Now let's look at this example of making conclusion questions from the OC Sample Thinking Skills exam. Next year at school, I need to choose 4 subjects to study. I have to choose one list from each of the following lists. List 1 contains arts, geography, history, and PE. List 2 contains English, maths, design, and health. List 3 contains English, geography, science, and technologies. And list 4 contains maths, science, PE, and technologies as well. I know that I want to study English, history, and science. Which one of the following can I not choose as my final subject? A. Arts, B. Geography, C. Health, or D. PE? This question falls in the relevant selection question category, as this question requires students to select the relevant pieces of information to answer the question. Now let's apply the general approach method to solve this question. So the first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking us, which one of the following can I not choose as my final subject, we want to determine the relevant subject from the subject lists and determine which answer option won't be chosen. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand that they can only choose one subject from the following lists, and they need to determine which subject out of the answer options can't be chosen. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. From this question, there are 3 key pieces of information. Key information 1 is that we need to choose 4 different subjects from the subject list. Key information 2 is that one subject out of the answer options won't be chosen. Key information 3 is that they want to study English, history, and science. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the information has been presented in a simple form. Putting it in another form may be time-consuming. Step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. English and science are contained in 2 of the lists, but history is only contained in list 1. Therefore, they can only choose the final subject from list 2, 3, or list 4. Arts appears in list 1 and nowhere else. Geography appears in list 1 and also list 3, health appears in list 2, and PE appears in list 1 and also list 2. So the only subject that they cannot choose is arts because it only appears in list 1. All the other answer options can be chosen while still being able to do the subjects they want to do. Let's look at this example of number operations relevant selection question from the Selective Sample Thinking Skills exam. The prices for passes for a tourist bus are shown in the table below. Pass for 1 day is $5, pass for 4 consecutive days is $10, and the pass for 7 consecutive days is $20. I will need a pass on the following days of the month: 2, 3, 4, 6, on the 10th, 11th, 12th, 14th, 15th, and 16th day of the month. How much is the cheapest valid combination I could use? A, $30, B, $35, C, $40, or D, $45. This question falls in the relevant selections questions category, as this question requires students to find the relevant pieces of information to reach an appropriate conclusion. Now let's apply the general approach method to solve the question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking us how much is the cheapest valid combination I could use, we want to determine the cheapest valid combination by using relevant pieces of information given in the question. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand the possible pass options, the days which a pass will be required during the month, and the need to determine what the cheapest combination will be to obtain a pass for the needed days. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information are needed. From this question, there are 2 key pieces of information. Key information 1 is that prices for the passes are given for a certain time period, and key information 2 is the days of the month where a pass is needed. So that's the 2nd, 3rd, 6th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the information has already been presented in a simple form. Putting it in another form may be time-consuming. Step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. The pass for 4 consecutive days is better valued than the pass for 1 day, as long as the bus is used on 3 of the days. The pass for 7 consecutive days can be ignored, as 2 passes for 4 consecutive days can be used to cover a period of 8 consecutive days for the same price. There are 3 points where 3 out of 4 consecutive days are used and 1 additional day. So the cheapest price would be 3 times $10 plus $5, and that is equal to $35. Let's look at this example of number operations questions from the OC Sample Thinking Skills exam. Brooke and Joyce wanted to find out which was the most popular traditional game at their school: Woolajini, Burin Jin, Kulchi, or Kintan. They did a survey of all the students at the school and found the following. Everyone who liked Woolajini also liked Kulchi. Some people liked both Kulchi and Burin Jin. No one liked both Burin Jin and Woolajini. There were more people who only liked Kulchi than people who only liked Burin Jini, and the Kintan fans were also fans of Woolajini. Which was the most popular game? A. Woolajini, B. Kulchi, C. Burin Jin, or D. Kintan. This question falls in the relevant selections questions category, as this question requires students to process the given information and select which pieces are relevant to answer the question. Now let's apply the general approach method to solve the question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking us which was the most popular game, we want to determine which game was chosen the most out of the surveyed students. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand that there are 4 choices students can choose from, and that the relationship between each game is also given. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information are needed. There are 2 key pieces of information. Key information 1 is the information in the dot points are important to determine which game was the most popular. So these. Key information 2 is that there are only 4 options students can choose from, which is Woolajini, Burin Jin, Kulchi, and Kintan. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the information can be presented in a diagram as shown. The size represents the rough number of people who chose each game, and the overlaps represent people who liked more than one game. And lastly, step 5 is to solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. So from the previous diagram and the information provided in the question, we can deduce that the most popular game is either Kulchi or Buranjin, and the people who liked both can be ignored. Since more people like Kulchi than those who like Buranjin, Kulchi must be the most popular game. Thank you for watching this lesson, and hopefully it has helped you understand a bit about problem solving and thinking skills, and the strategies on how to solve these questions. Please note, as stated in the start of the lesson, studying and reading consistently are essential for successful outcomes.